doing a response video. Like it's 2010. And I have a script. On February 13th, 2025, Jermaine Fowler, who goes by the Humanity Archive on his social media and on his website, the yaicob.com, posted an Instagram reel about the 17th century Ethiopian philosopher yaicob. I watched the video, and I knew something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. So I did a little digging, and as it turns out, the deeper I dug, the worse the video got. I was gonna make a 1-minute Instagram response video, just addressing my concerns, correcting the most egregious errors, but then I started writing it, and you've seen the length of this video. As a yaicob myself, I feel like this is just something I have to do. So, let's do it. I'm going to try to separate my personal opinions from the subject matter. So at any point during this video that I express a personal opinion on something, keep that in mind, it's personal. Now, this video is really a slideshow set to music, so we're going to go slide by slide. He starts the video by saying, Europe called it their enlightenment. An African philosopher beat them by decades. I think the obvious way to start is by defining our terms. I've always had a vague idea of the Enlightenment, mostly through Nietzsche's madman, running into town, smashing his lantern on the ground. God is dead, he cries. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods, simply to appear worthy of it? The so-called Enlightenment of Western European philosophy was a movement by which a class of mostly French philosophers, along with their contemporaries in Scotland and Germany and the smattering of Enlightenment thinkers across Europe and North America, killed God. They removed him from their fundamental approach to reason, essentially replacing him with themselves, which is what the madman was getting at earlier. This video isn't about the European Enlightenment, but it will be helpful to establish this context now so that we can freely call on it later. By saying an African philosopher beat them by decades, Mr. Fowler necessitates some chronology. So when did the Enlightenment begin isn't really the kind of question that has a simple answer, but as Sam Elliott Bossman points out in the comments, Descartes published his most famous treatise in 1637, literally 30 years before Hadithah was published. Now, according to the timeline this video establishes, Descartes' work predates yaiacob's by some decades, and you'll see why I added the caveat later. According to Stanford's Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Descartes' rationalist system of philosophy is one of the pillars on which Enlightenment thought rests. So no, an African philosopher did not beat them by decades. He was actually almost contemporary with the earliest Enlightenment thinkers. That is sensationalist, it's inflammatory, it's reductive. Next slide. In 1667, Ethiopian yaicob was exiled for questioning religious doctrine. Now, this is the part that raised the first red flags in my head. As soon as someone who doesn't follow an Ethiopian religion starts talking about Ethiopia and about religion, it's been my experience that they are almost guaranteed to get something wrong. But I was optimistic. I had hoped that Jermaine would be the exception, and it did not last long. So if you're looking at this picture and you're thinking, something's not quite right here, great minds think alike, and we'll get to that. But first, exiled for questioning religious doctrine. In 1622, Ethiopian Emperor Susenyos became a Roman Catholic, granting brief success to one of the many campaigns Romans made over the centuries to conquer Ethiopia, and ushering in a short but dark period of Ethiopian history. During his reign, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo faith was persecuted, as was anyone he could get his hands on who didn't accept the faith of the Ferenj, literally foreigners, usually Europeans, in this case specifically Portuguese Roman Catholics. Caught up in this persecution was yaicob, a native of Aksum, who, by virtue of his unique public position on current events, found himself in an awkward position. Hence I was disliked by all. The Copts took me for a Ferenj, the Ferenj for a Copt. By the way, when he says Copt, he's not actually talking about Egyptians. At this time in history, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was under the apostolic administration of the Coptic Orthodox Church, which is a can of worms I will not be opening today. So the Coptic misnomer has been applied to Ethiopian Orthodox Christians a lot, historically, and sometimes you'll see remnants of it, even today, among the misinformed and presumptuous on social media. Saying Yaicob was exiled for questioning religious doctrine is a misrepresentation of what happened. In his own words, "After this, I left for another school to study the interpretation of the Holy Scriptures. I remained 10 years in this type of study. I learned the interpretations both of the Faranj and of our own scholars. Oftentimes their interpretations did not agree with my reason, but I withheld my opinion and hid in my heart all the faults of my mind. And while I was teaching and interpreting the books, I used to say, the Faranj say this and this, or the Copts say that and that. And I did not say, this is good, that is bad, but I said, all these things are good if we ourselves are good." So you can understand the confusion from earlier. Nobody really knew what to think of this guy, and he wasn't exactly helping them. Eventually, according to him, he was falsely accused of sedition, rise up for the sake of our faith, kill the king, and expel the Faranj. Becoming aware of the danger he was now in, "I took 3 measures of gold which I possessed, and the Psalms of David with which I prayed, and fled at night." So it's even misleading to say he was exiled. He exiled himself. He also came out of his cave, by the way. He lived in a cave. He would wander into an Amhara town for food and then disappear back into his cave. People were fine with this because this is how Ethiopian hermits roll. But he came out when Susenyos died in 1632. The astute among you will notice this is not 1667. So far, slide 2 is batting 0 for 3, but maybe it can score at least 1 point by using an appropriate image reference. What do you think? I'm going to combine this image with the one used in slide 7, and we're going to look briefly at one of my favorite topics, Ethiopian iconography. First of all, neither of these paintings are of Yaicob, 17th century philosopher. This one depicts the coronation of Yaicob, 15th century emperor, which is an amateurish mistake to have made. Now, I wanted to make the joke that he seems to have confused this Wikipedia page for this one, but I've been using Wikipedia throughout my research, and I'm pretty sure he didn't even check it. Wikipedia. He didn't read the Wikipedia page of the man he was making a video about. That's worse than amateurism. That's downright negligence.
Because if you're going to make a YouTube video about someone, you have to read the Wikipedia page first to make sure there's nothing weird that people are going to yell at you for not mentioning.
The other image he used is what raised the second red flag in my mind on my initial viewing. So I'll take you through my journey, starting from this image. This man has a halo around his head. That is not 17th century philosopher Yaicob. I know Emperor Yaicob is a saint. Could it be him? It doesn't look like a typical icon of a king. I took a screenshot on my phone and reverse image searched it. It took 5 seconds. It even cropped the image for me. And what I found answered the implicit question, which is, how did he manage to mistake this icon for Yaicob? Getty Images says that this icon is of St. George and is found in the Church of the Holy Trinity in Debre Birhan, a city in the center of Ethiopia. When I found out it was in Debre Birhan Selassie, I remembered something I had seen from skimming the Wikipedia entry for Yaicob, 15th century emperor. He had made Debre Birhan his capital. So, if you'll follow me, we've gone from Yaicob, 17th century philosopher, to Yaicob, 15th century emperor, to Debre Birhan, his capital city, to the Church of the Holy Trinity in Debre Birhan, which is not even one of the churches he built. Like, Yaicob is known as a builder of churches. He built many in Debre Birhan, but the Holy Trinity Church was built by Sahle Selassie in the 19th century and rebuilt by Menelik in the 20th. We've come all this way to go into the church, look at one of the icons, which most sources on the internet are telling you is of St. George, and say, yeah, that must mean Yaicob, 17th century philosopher. And by the way, if anyone from Getty is watching, this icon is not of St. George. If you actually investigate these image results, you'll see that some of the photos, but admittedly not yours, include the inscription at the bottom of the icon. This one from suitcaseandworld.com has it right there, in high enough resolution that you can actually read it. It says, Zakama warada usta siol exina Jesus Christos ras ewawe nafsat, which I'm loosely translating as, when our Lord Jesus Christ descended into Sheol to the spirits in prison. I originally went with souls in captivity, but 1 Peter 3:19 in the King James Version uses the phrase, the spirits in prison, so I'm going with that for the sake of recognizability. And may his name be praised, this is an icon of Jesus Christ, which, by your lack of rigor, scrap that, lack of effort, you told the internet is a painting of Yaicob, 17th century philosopher. Next slide, please. he wrote Hatata, a philosophical treatise arguing reason, not faith, reveals truth. I want to start with a pet peeve that has nothing to do with this video, so take a break, Jermaine. I'll get back to you in a minute. The book is not called Hatata. The word is not Hatata. The word is Hatata. Now, obviously, people are not reading Giz, because if they were, someone at Getty would have noticed that the icon they called St. George said Jesus Christos in the bottom corner. But if you do read the Giz script, nowadays used in Tigray, Tigrinya, and Amharic, its daughters with the most lexical similarity, and quite a few other languages in Ethiopia and Eritrea, you will find that the Wikipedia page for this book gives its title as Hatata, but it's transliterated as Hatata. Now, there isn't really a standard way to transliterate, which is to render a language in a writing system that doesn't use Giz in the Latin alphabet, which is why if you have captions on, you'll notice that my spelling of Yacob is different from the one he uses, because I'm just spelling it how I spell my own name. And there have been systems used in the past by Western linguists to comprehensively study Giz, and they used an A with an umlaut over it to represent the Giz vowel E. Now, I'm pretty sure they were German, and transcribing it for speakers of German, in which case, that was almost an exact match phonetically. But German linguists and casual English readers are not the same audience. So a lot of Giz names and words get poorly rendered and then mispronounced by English speakers, trusting that whoever was doing the transliteration was trying to represent the sound phonetically for them. A reasonable but unfortunately faulty assumption. So, everyone say it with me. Hatata. Now, the picture he used is actually of a manuscript of Hatata, so if you're keeping score, I believe he gets his first point there. As for what Hatata is actually about, I'm willing to give him that description. 2 points for Jane. Next slide. He championed equality and religious tolerance while Europe still burned witches. Well, he did, actually. I can't speak to the Europe burning witches thing, and please don't imagine that Ethiopia wasn't also executing her criminals and dissidents, because she absolutely was. Next slide. Written in Giz, Africa's classical language. The West couldn't read it. Oh good, I get to talk about the African monolith problem. The African monolith problem is, as the scholars among you will have guessed, the problem that you get when you treat Africa as a monolith, because Africa is massive and massively diverse. Giz is the ancient language of the empire, the Aksumite Empire, and it's the liturgical language of the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo churches. Africa has a lot of classical languages, like Coptic, the liturgical language of the Coptic or Egyptian Orthodox Church. Never generalize any statement to all of Africa haphazardly. You will be wrong. Now, the West couldn't read it. According to an article in Global History Dialogues, the first Giz printing press was found in Rome, and the earliest book printed in the Giz script was called Psalterium David et Cantica Liqua in Lingua Chaldea, commissioned and published by Roman Catholic Papal Secretary Johannes Potkem in 1513, almost a century before Yacob, 17th century philosopher, was born. Now, Potkem may have called the language Chaldean for some reason, continuing a time-honored tradition of Europeans being totally fascinated by Africa, not really understanding much about it, and then just making things up. But the West has been reading Giz, in some small way, for a surprisingly long time. Next slide. His work predated Locke, Descartes, and Kant. Locke and Kant? Yeah. Descartes, I guess, but Descartes was actually born 4 years before Yacob, and they were in fact contemporaries. However, Wikipedia says Yacob actually wrote Hatata a long time after his exile, in 1668, weirdly a single year off from the incorrect date Germain ascribed to his exile. Wikipedia says it, but doesn't provide a citation for that date, so I can't say it with confidence. But it does give me an opportunity to talk about citation. Now, Germain doesn't provide any. I mean, not on Instagram. He does have it set up so that he'll send an automated reply if you use a certain keyword in his comments, but the claims he makes on Instagram are not referenced on Instagram, which is just bad form. Now, you might be thinking, but Yacob, 21st century complainer, who puts references under an Instagram post? And I'll tell you who. This guy. Known as the Rainforester online, he talks about biomes, ecology, cool animal facts, and the fact that apparently blue birds aren't blue. His page is excellent, and his videos are fascinating, and crucially, thoroughly sourced. I mean, look at this. 7 references. These are 7 references under a video about one rainforest. This is how you cite your sources. But of course, if you didn't check any sources, you have a problem. Now, I've been reading about this guy and his book all morning, and I can't find a single source that I could confidently say Jermaine has read, because the video is literally full of mistakes that he wouldn't have made if he had. His name was buried, his ideas erased, because they came from Africa. Well, I'll give you this. Yaicob, the name, is not common. Living in the Western Hemisphere, I get this pit in my stomach every time I have to introduce myself to someone. Half a minute of correcting their extremely weird mispronunciations, and then another minute of having to justify why my name is my name, as if a black man having an African name is any weirder than a country full of black people walking around with Scottish names. That's a different video. Different video. As for his ideas, I get why he's not very popular, personally. He clearly missed the point when he was studying the Andamta of the Bible, and his writing is full of opinions that, while enlightened by modern Western standards, demonstrate a surprising spiritual immaturity from an Ethiopian Christian perspective. Maybe he shouldn't have withheld his opinion and hid in his heart all the thoughts of his mind. Maybe he should have actually asked one of his teachers a question at any point. And maybe the lesson that we learn from Yaicob, not as Jermaine frames it, is that questioning is rebellion and controversy and revolutionary, but that asking questions is how you learn things. And then when you don't ask questions, the work you publish ends up being riddled with frankly embarrassing mistakes. Now, the last slide doesn't have much to fact check aside from using a painting of Yaicob, 15th century king, but then he adds his closing statement to the very bottom. The Enlightenment began in Ethiopia. No, it didn't. And we don't want credit for that. Maybe Ethiopia can find herself in Nietzsche's work after all, in the character of the saint from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Zarathustra saluted the saint and said, "What should I have to give you? But let me go quickly, that I take nothing from you." And thus they parted from one another, the old man and Zarathustra, laughing as two boys laugh. But when Zarathustra was alone, he spoke thus to his heart. Could it be possible? This old saint has not heard in his forest that God is dead. Now the saint is laughing too, because the saint knows what Zarathustra doesn't. The saint knows that the madman, raving in the marketplace, mourns not God, but the people of the town. Because God is not dead. They cannot kill him. But there is blood on their hands, because they bear God's image. So when they aimed at what appeared to be God, they struck his image within themselves. I hope they can find the water with which to cleanse themselves. I hope they find the sacred festival by which they can atone, because God is not dead. I haven't even gotten to the title of the video yet. Ethiopia is large, ancient, very spiritual, and very complex. Don't try to tell the world our history for us. You'll almost certainly get it wrong. It's not your fault. Ignorance is not a fault. Yaicob was ignorant. His fault. He didn't ask questions.